And for the first time, and maybe it was COVID smacking me on the back of the head, but for the first time, I feel a sense of, I think it's hope. I haven't really experienced this in rather a long time, but the notion that you're looking around and 90% of the people who are just trying to get by are doing okay. Even the stupid governments are doing the right thing.
I'd like to ask you how you see things going forward with XR, with your own work, since we have this COVID lockdown, which is liable to expand as nations try to loosen for the sake of their economy, and keeps kids keeps adults from joining street marches, demonstrations.
Well, the general theme of our conversation is, that, as you've identified, is the future is always ultimately unknowable, right? So we'll just re-establish that fundamental principle, which isn't to say you can't make you can't make some reasoned guesses, particularly in the short term. But as we all know, like, making guesses in social matters is even more difficult than geophysical matters. So if I understand you rightly, John, and I think there's a connection between us here potentially, which is that I think as we identify what a total fuck up we're entering into, it sort of starts to peel back the sort of hubris or arrogance of the sort of humanism and enlightenment dogma that we've all been, you know, socialized into, but is, of course, anthropologically speaking, a bit of an outlier in terms of human culture. The truth be known, you know, for better or worse, and I'm not making any ultimate...
It's been a blast these last couple of centuries, but okay, now what?
I've finally gotten my opportunity to
I'm not
up on. Here are my rose-colored glasses.
Yes. So, you know, I'm not an expert on social collapse, so I do know a few things about it, which I think a lot of people don't know. And of course, in social collapse situations, you get what's called in the trade bifurcation of social systems, which is people start splintering off in all directions. And, you know, some people will become very hedonistic. Some people, you know, kill themselves. Some people become super fatalistic. Some people join cults. And some people become extremely wise and humble and hopefully lead humanity out of the abyss. Sort of archetypical biblical sort of orientation. But you tend to... You know, one of the things people don't quite get, I suppose, is that you can't have all those things happen at once. They're all structurally determined. It's not like the whole of human race is suddenly going to become really sensible. You know, there's going to be all sorts of variations, and it's really difficult to know how it's going to pan out, though, you know. So I think, like, what's interesting for me is to use my limited agency to try and create a grounded sort of revolutionary humility.
Brilliant. I love it. Note that one down, Stuart. Revolutionary humility. That's a thought.
It will appear above.
In other words, like, I count in some ultimate philosophical sense, you know, argue with someone like Guy McPherson, who just wants to do, you know, nothing, although he says he wants to do things, he doesn't actually do very much. But, you know, like, who can ultimately tell anyone what to do, right? You know, but I think there are substantial sort of pointers towards what works in existential situations more often than not. And as I think I indicated at the beginning, it's not like the experience of annihilation is unique to the human experience. It's actually a regular event, and there's lots of myths and rules of thumb and cultural adaptations that are used to, you know, either accommodate yourself to annihilation and or to avoid it. You know?
And
I think
it's funny because you're bang on there. Sorry, I just want to interrupt because I mean, the last interview I did with Stuart was on the COVID and the fact of the retreat, you know. And I mean, okay, wow. So the Earth is currently telling us it can do 7% a year, even if we don't like it, and but everyone's saying we got to get back to normal. Doesn't Sorry, that's not working for me. And then I found myself bizarrely teleworking. I've got four pretty grown children, so and there's boyfriends and girlfriends as well, and so but I'm in a nice house. I got some space, and I'm sitting there, and we're kind of teleworking away together. And something has happened that a family that should have been exploded has somehow become nuclear in a kind of bizarre way, with all sorts of rejigging of relationships and some very heavy personal soul searching on the part of this, you know, 20th century brutal, silly, useless Irish man of a dad, um, and it's been strangely wonderful. Now I've been very privileged. I've had space. I've had my family, but then again, my my scope of action has been massively reduced, and I'm thinking, who do I really admire around here? Those little girls and boys who are actually sitting at the checkouts and giving me my food, the people who stand politely in the queues in Belgium, you know, waiting for that one person to go in and do the grocery shopping. We've got some space to take the dogs for a walk in the park. What else do I need here? And I'm thinking, it'd be great to keep the sewers on and possibly the internet. Apart from that, where else would I be going with this? And this has been imposed on me. I didn't invent this. You know, I would never have proposed this. And I'm thinking, whoa, there's something pretty cool about this. And for the first time, and maybe it was COVID smacking me on the back of the head, but for the first time, I feel a sense of. I think it's hope. I haven't really experienced this in rather a long time, but the notion that you're looking around and 90% of the people who are just trying to get by are doing okay. Even the stupid governments are doing the right thing in the sense of putting money into people's accounts. How do they stop? You can argue that at this stage, Western Europe, the economy is 75% social. It's socialist at this stage because all the kind of everyone's getting kind of, roughly speaking, the same 1,200 euros plonked into everyone's account who's been made redundant. When are they going back?
In the U.S., it's in the U.S.
Yeah, I know it's just coming to an end. But again, as Roger was saying, things are going to break in all sorts of different ways. And I'm looking around me and thinking, there's something to be. I hate the notion of understanding, because understanding is Sisyphus standing under a rock, standing under understanding. We don't understand. Maybe the time has come to live, to breathe, to shepherd one another, and not to understand. If the 5 or 6 of us suddenly understood everything now, would it make a difference?
What's interesting, John, and I haven't met you before, but I could have predicted this, is that people that are ruthless enough to see reality for what it is, actually are reasonably cheerful.
Yes. Yeah.
And I think what it is,
yes,
you know, and I'm a sort of social observer, you know, sociologist if you want. I mean, I'm not trying to oversell myself, but that's broadly what I do. And I think this is quite an interesting phenomenon, that when you get social stress or social disruption, you get a far greater diversity of orientations. And what we've had for 30 years, I sort of feel what we've had for 30 years is a form of totalitarianism, you know, spiritually and material and politically and socially. It's obviously people haven't been shot in gulags or something in the Western world, but we've had an enormous reduction of philosophical and life philosophical diversity. You know, everyone's been pushed into this individualism career thing, you know, sit at night, watch you know, Netflix, have your 2 kids, you know, go to the hospital when something's tricky. Don't think about death. Don't think about anything too tricky, right? And it's got, you know, I'm not necessarily knocking it. It's, you know, there's lots of worse systems in the world.
Got us here.
But the point is,
now what?
The point is I sort of feel like we're in 1962 or something, and in 6 years' time we're going to be in 68. You know, like you remember 62, it's a bit
Brilliant.
like everyone, you know, no
yeah,
disrespect to Stuart, but everyone was wearing ties, no one talked about sex, and drugs were off the agenda, right? And I sort of feel that in 6 years' time, everything's going to be bonkers. Everyone's going to be cracking up, or at least 5 or 10% of the population are.
Nice.
And I think this is what COVID's doing. Is COVID's like, you know, it's not going to scale yet. We're still in the beat generation, as it were. Like me and you are sort of those old poets in the 1950s who are sort of, you know, the wilderness type people, you know. And but we're going to be like the trailblazers for the whole diversity of moral and political and spiritual sort of stuff that's going to get rediscovered. I think that what I'm trying to say, Stuart, is I think the main issue here is character development amongst the activist community. And there's different ways of constructing this. But what I'm trying to say is, and as a sociologist of radical change, one of the things that I identify is people become more successful at radical change to the extent that they don't care whether they're going to be successful or not. And this is a central paradox. Right? You know, it's like the more you think about it, the more it does your head in, because you go around in circles. Because I'm, you know, spend all my time thinking about how to be effective. But, you know, you realize that the more you try to be effective, less effective you are. And there's, you know, there's similarities in different social spheres as well. So what I'm interested in so much as I'm a leader figure without sounding too pompous, is to try and say to people that want to change the world, the last thing you're going to be able to do in terms of change the world is if you're trying to do it. What you need to focus on is what it is to be a sort of good person. In other words, we have to return to various systems of virtue ethics. And I'm not just saying that because it happens to be an act of faith, as it were, for me, but I'm also saying as a sociologist that people that don't get put off, in other words, people who aren't, which is why I don't really like your question, Stuart, right? Your question is sort of, let's work this out, you know, let's try and work out. If we do this, it comes back to John's idea of the arrogance of humanism. Let's work this out. You know, if we have a big thing in September and then that happens, you know, like it's all bollocks, right? We don't know. What we do know is I'm over this shit and I'm going to go out in September, throw paint over government buildings and end up in prison, right? And who knows what's going to happen after that. That's the mentality that sort of brings down governments, if you see what I mean, where people forget about their self-interests and get mad and just go for it. And I'm not making some ultimate case for it. You know, maybe it's a tricky idea, but that's what I'm trying to encourage when I talk to people. I mean, obviously I tell them that they're fucked because of climate, right? People need to know that, you know, but the next step is to start understanding what it is to be human and what it is to be Irish or what it is to be a dad, you know, and reconnect with virtue ethics orientations, you see what I mean? I mean, one of the things, I'm going to do a speech in Wales next week, and I'm going to say, when the socialists in the Welsh valleys went off to fight Franco in the Spanish Civil War, and there's research on this, right? They didn't go to fight Franco because they thought they were going to win. They went to fight Franco because it had to be done. You see what I mean?
Yes.
You know,
Brilliant.
they could not live with the fascist threat. They went to Spain in order to make a stand. And that's what we need to sort of grow up. You know, it's about a culture growing up as far as I can see. It's about saying like, you know, this is the person I am and I'm not standing for this, you know, monstrous suicide nonsense.
In my own defense here,
Brilliant.
As a complement, an analog to the famous phrase, in unity there's strength, in diversity there's strength. If I weren't trying to still change the world up until the moment of my death, we would not be talking. This important conversation would not make it to the internet for 50, God willing, 100,000 people to listen to. So it takes both. It takes those people who...
Yeah, absolutely. As I said,
absolutely.
I mean, my day job is working out how to be effective, right? So I'm contradicting myself. And contradictions are interesting, of course. That's another problem with our
I work
culture.
for the European Union. Give me a break.
Anyway, I'll pass on to Robert to bring us back down to reality, as
real.
it were.
What's the question?
So, well, just come back to the question. Well, yes, I mean, our personal lives, we've seen how COVID has changed what we think we need to have, how planes can stop flying and businesses can close and the world can still go on. However, the power really does rest even more than in governments, rest in corporations. And it's there where the money is, and there where the control of our society really lies. And I wonder what you were thinking about how possibly to interact with corporations or how to deal with that block of power and that me firstness that greed has created.
Yeah, and I think your initial reference may have been to a interview I did about what's happening with this, with the whole system because of this COVID virus, correct? And that was with Sam Mitchell. And the point I was making then, I was really talking about the cannibalism and the self-destruction of capitalism at the time, because what's happened is they're starting to consume themselves. And I was making reference to the fact that one of the largest trajectories financially, and I used to do a lot of research for hedge funds. And so I know quite a bit about finance and the modern monetary theory 2.0, I call it today. And that is that the largest increase in debt in this country over the last several years has been corporate debt. But what happened with the corporate debt is that they were taking the money, for example, the US Airlines borrowed billions last year. And you know what they did with the money? They bought their stock.
Yep.
They bought their stock. So the CEOs would make more money on their own stock and their stock options. So they were buying their stocks with money they borrowed at $50, $60, $70 a share, and those stocks are $10 a share today. That interview dealt with the financial ramifications of the COVID disaster we've got on our hands. So this modern monetary theory 2.0 that we're living under now is to literally find the biggest fire hose you can find and spray all the money you can find all over the planet. And this is a whole new scenario that I don't think is going to rescue what I thought was going to be the demise of our current capitalistic system. And I still think that's coming. I think they're cannibalizing themselves. And that's one of the ways they were doing it. And it comes back and haunts them in time. And it's really a screwed up system we've got right now. And it's not fair for the 99%. The 1% is one of the greatest little things I've ever heard in my life. It tells a huge story. 1% tells a huge story.
And it's an exaggeration because it's probably 0.1 or 0.01%.
Well, soon, you know, Stuart, soon we know from some numbers that very shortly, two individuals will, and here's your exponential function at work, John. Very shortly, two individuals will own 50% of the assets of the world. It's not going to take long. 50%.
Jeff Bezos and who else?
The guy in Mexico. What's his name?
Yeah, I know the fella who owns that. Yeah.
Carlos. That's it.
Carlos.
But you know, I mean, that's where it's already down to 6 people now own I don't know how much. So is that kind of a quasi-totalitarianism? Yeah, it is. Yeah, Roger, you're right. We've been living under totalitarianism ever since Reagan and Thatcher decided to embrace Milton Friedman's neoliberal concept that he wrote a paper about in 1951. And the whole world glommed onto it in terms of the monetary interest, starting with Reagan and Thatcher. And here we go. It's a monetary, capitalistic, totalitarian form that we've got. And the corporations control the whole thing, plain and simple.
And the politicians are their pawns. Roger, did you want to?
Yeah. Well, I get invited onto these like sort of left-wing chats, as I call them, right? And you know, I have a particular take on this. And sorry to come in again, but I think this is important.
Please.
Is that society is not the same as geophysics, right? Geophysics is set. Society is understood through social constructions, and those social constructions are always like related to what they're pointed. It's like a circular system. And what I'm trying to say is that when you say we are pawns of the corporate system, like that's part of the corporate system to believe that we're pawns, if you see what I mean. That's a central element to it. And this is what you might call a non-materialistic analysis of social systems, which is that it only exists because we believe it, right? Social systems are totally functional only because of belief systems, and those belief systems can change. And historically, they change very rapidly. And once those belief systems change, it doesn't matter how many noughts you've got on your computer screen behind the figure, right? The whole thing can go. And so, like when we allow ourselves to get pulled into the materialistic defeatism of the left, we basically haven't got an avenue. It's like an excuse for inaction. It's like these people control everything. No, they don't. They control everything because we believe they control everything. That's it. It only takes, as a sociologist, I'll tell you, it only takes 3.5% of the population to go onto the street and the thing will collapse, right? So you only need 3.5% of the population to have a different belief system and the whole thing collapses. And if you want some historical examples, you can look at, the Mongol tribesmen that sort of, rampaged over Asia, right, in 10 years, right? How did that happen? Because they had a belief system. It wasn't because their bows were particularly good, right? When Muhammad, when Islam came out of Arabia, the Holy Roman Empire or the Byzantine Empire rather was on paper enormously powerful. It didn't stop them collapsing because these Arabs believed in something, right? And they'd go to their death over it. So just coming back to what I was saying before is, as the social system becomes more contradictory, and you can use a Marxist analysis there if you like, it will create a diversity of belief systems. And some of those belief systems will go viral and they will bring down the system. They'll bring down the whole thing in 3 weeks. In fact, that's the most likely scenario, in my scholarly opinion. It won't be something gradual, but it'll be all or nothing. And I'm not saying this because I'm a naive optimist or anything. I'm just saying don't buy the self-conception of your opponent, right? If you want to actually improve the way the world is.
There's a wonderful philosopher, a West Coast American, but actually of British birth, Alan Watts, who I'm an enormous fan of. You'll find him all over YouTube. He was kind of the beating heart of the San Francisco 60s and 70s. In the US. I think he's probably the greatest philosopher of the 20th century, but he would laugh at me trying to put anybody in any sort of a hierarchy. Anyway, wonderful character. But he points out quite accurately that belief and faith are two completely opposite principles. Belief is something that attaches itself to a series of articles, a construct. I believe in. I still remember as a small Catholic boy growing up in Ireland, I was supposed to believe in one holy Catholic and Apostolic Church, and there's a whole ream of things that we were supposed to believe in. I didn't know what they were, but so a belief system is this belief system, as Roger was saying. Faith, on the other hand, is something completely different. It is a recognition of the way things are, and a confidence to deal with them as they unfold. It's a completely different thing. You have faith that this is the way it is. This is the way I handle it. I'm now much less interested, sorry, Dale, in the notions of bloody capitalists, Jeff Bezos or whoever, or the European Commission or the bloody Brexiteers. All of these are symptoms of something far deeper that's happening, of a current that Roger's getting very close to pinning down, that may have echoes in the 19th century and so on and so forth. And it's something about a deep acknowledgement of the way things are and the confidence to face them the way they are, not hamstrung by belief systems. but confident in, you know, in our place in this universe and how we will handle it. And as I say, we stop believing in Jeff Bezos, he disappears. Blake used to say, we become what we behold. Don't behold them.
Yeah, and I think, you know, an interesting data point here, just in case people think we're just waffling on.
We are just waffling on, but it's great fun.
Is Extinction Rebellion, right? Extinction Rebellion. My analysis of Extinction Rebellion was it was an act of faith, as you've just defined it, right? Not in some narrow religious thing. It's not like we're all Catholics or something, but in the sense that we had an idea of what to do, what was going on and what to do about it, which wasn't negotiable and wasn't open to sort of, you know, short-term analysis, as you might say. So, you know, the classic example is calling the name Extinction Rebellion, right? I mean, it's interesting, it might be interesting for you to know that this caused enormous discord, right? Everyone thinks now it's a fantastic name, right? But at the time, people were going, are you joking? You know, no one wants to rebel. Extinction, who wants to know about extinction? You know, this is just a nightmare name. We've got to change it. We've got to be positive. We've got to try and fit in, you know, and, you know, a bunch of us are just going, no, we're going extinct. We need to rebel. Fuck it. That's what we're going to call ourselves, right? And if it stays with 15 people in a cafe in Bristol, then so be it, you know. And I remember going to people, so Roger, what are you up to? And I was going, I'm organising a rebellion against the British government. And as soon as I said it, I was expecting people to go, what a twat, you know. And of course, interestingly enough, it was an emperor without the clothes moment, wasn't it? Because people suddenly went, actually, Roger, that's a really good idea. And, you know, 200,000 people suddenly came out of the closet.
Where's my army?
And said, actually, that's what we want. So, you know, this is what I'm trying to say in terms of undermining the sort of defeatist, poor me, Trump and the corporations rule the world. So subliminally, we can't do anything, so we can only be miserable on YouTube sort of culture, right?
Not going to happen. No.
You know,
no, sir.
Believe, take a leap of faith, and, you know, who knows, it could be wrong, but it's leap of faith that are going to bring down the evil, dare I say it.
So, John, I wanted to put a plug in for your mention of Alan Watts as maybe one of the finest philosophers of the 20th century. And people on the West Coast in the United States can tune in to Pacifica Radio every Sunday morning at 8 o'clock and listen to him carry on for 1 hour. I do it every Sunday without
Isn't
miss.
that unreal?
It's like
There's
going
a synchronicity,
to a religious
man.
sermon somewhere. He is one of the most amazing people I've ever encountered in my entire life.
Agreed.
And I think it's really fascinating that you bring up Alan Watts.
It's just to make a hat trick that Alan Watts was a major influence on me in my early 20s. So maybe we should all confess that we're all part of an Alan Watts cult or something.
Oh, yes.
And
this is so cool.
you know, and everyone can blame it on Alan Watts that we're so weird. But
there you go. That's great.
I want to quote the famous 21st century philosopher Yoda. Try there is not, only do there is.
That's good. Listen.